Welcome to the best ever brass music instrument makers podcast. I'm Jake.
And I'm Mathias. And just to make one thing clear, we are not the best ever brass instrument makers. This is just the best ever brass instrument makers podcast.
Says you. So, hi everybody. We are broadcasting from Berlin, Germany, Deutschland. Today is the 13th of November 2020.
Oh no, we are gonna die.
It's Friday the 13th. Jumping right into it for long-time listeners of the podcast, we're taking a question from a tuba colleague from Spain, and his question is this. I am a lover of old instruments. He means tubas. I especially love to play tubas from the beginning of the 20th century into the late 1960s or early 70s. The reason is because those instruments usually use a lighter material than modern, I'm paraphrasing here, and that gives the player a great response and a warm sound full of harmonics compared to, say, a modern instrument. So his question is, the follow-up is, why did they change these building techniques from what was used previously, so before the 1970s, and when did they start to use heavier and heavier material, and when exactly did this happen? That is an amazing question, and I don't even know if we can even answer it in the time we have on the podcast here, but it gets to the heart of a lot of issues with brass instrument making.
Yeah,
so
just point light on some high spots and
pour yourself a nice glass of wine, a nice beer, cozy up to the fire, and we'll see if we can knock this one out of the park for you. But this is a common issue, especially with tuba, but also you see with all the other brass instruments, also trombone, tuba, trumpet, and so on. Basically, what we're seeing, this is also for the other brass instrument makers out there, maybe just a shout out to you guys, especially with B-flat tubas in Germany. People still buy new B-flats, that's cool. I mean, they sell a lot of horns and stuff, but what you're starting to see now is you see a lot of colleagues who are buying tubas that are over 100 years old, especially Kaiser tubas, and they're having them overhauled with modern components, but retaining the original body. And I think that goes along with what the colleague's question here is. So why would somebody go to all the trouble to dig up an old corpse of a tuba and beat it back into life and then take it into a professional setting? Just from the instrument maker's perspective, and also I get from the players as well, like the colleague here says, these older instruments tend to be much lighter. They tend to resonate in some ways quite differently, and they take less energy to get them spinned up. We notice this with modern instruments. They're easier to play very often, but the older ones are in some sense easier to get a good response out of. So, okay, but beside all of that, from the construction point of view, if you were to go into a workshop, say from the 1920s or 1930s, you would notice that many of the components on, say, a tuba would be made out of sheet brass. So the makers would start with a flat sheet. They would then cut out a conical form. This would be formed into various cones, depending on what part of the tuba. These would then be formed, so in a straight cone, they would then usually be filled with lead, and these parts would then be bent into whatever shapes were needed for that instrument. And in the bending process, they required a lot of hammering, a lot of burnishing. So in the very end, you end up with an instrument that has a lot of hand hammering. And also, due to the necessary, most of the bending done by hand, many of the components are not as thick as, say, modern instruments. So, okay, then fast forward now into modern times. If you were going to make the same component, let's just say a bottom bow on a tuba, you would take a cylindrical tube, and this would first be bent into a U shape, not from sheet.
First, it will be filled with water.
Right, thank you.
Frozen, then be bent roughly.
Right. Also quite roughly, yeah.
Then put into a split die, that's what you call it.
Or a blowout die.
Die. Processed by a process called hydroforming. So they will inject water or oil with high pressure. So the bow will take the shape of the die. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't a new thing back in the 1930s.
I mean, Con actually had this already in 1900.
Right. It just take a while to get to old-fashioned Europe. But it's just so much effective and cheaper, and especially uniform, because you make 100 bows in a row and their tolerances are quite similar, which doesn't happen when you make a bottom bow in the traditional way, made of sheet brass,
Right.
of two pieces and braced together, hammered out, rubbed out, destroying your arms, and
It's quite labor intensive.
it's a hard job, and just the knowledge isn't that common anymore. There are a few people who still know how to do this, and luckily there are a few companies who go through all the trouble to do it or to offer it, as long as you put some extra money on the table.
That's quite a bit extra money, I think. Yeah.
But the average instrument is made in a standardized process that requires starting with a heavier wall thickness.
Right.
So the material can stand the stress of this die deformation.
Right. So normally when you would make certain tubes with a split die, if it's not thick enough, you would actually break the parts. I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically, it's in terms of modern production, basically to save money, to be more consistent. These hydraulic processes were developed to allow fast production times. So that's a big one, I think. For that probably deals with, I think, with about maybe 50-60% of the issue. There is, however, one other issue with older tubas compared to newer ones that's also very important. And there are basically, I mean, there are many different ways, but there are basically two types of tuba bells that were made or are made. There are one-piece bells and there are two-piece bells. And there's a lot of discussion over which one is better. And I've played tubas from both versions where both are good or both are bad. But however, most older tubas, especially before the 1960s, used what we would call a one-piece bell. Basically, the entire material of the bell, other than the crowns, if there was one, or even inserts even, but basically most of the metal was cut from a single piece. Now again, to go faster, to allow for a more consistent product, many makers switched over to a two-piece process where the flare, the last 15 to 20 centimeters of the bell are spun from a disc, cut off, and then set onto the cone. In this process, it changes quite a bit of how the instrument plays, and this process combined with the heavier modern manufacturing tends to end up with a bell that's, in my opinion, is a bit stiffer than an older instrument. And you see this also with modern trumpet making. Most professional modern trumpets are also one-piece bells. There are, of course, people who still use two-piece ones to good effect, but the vast majority, they realize that, this does resonate better. Okay, one piece it is. It is more labor intensive. It does require more handwork, but the end result is better. But when you're talking about something like a tuba bell that requires so much material and so much time to form into a correct shape, two-piece simplifies this work a lot. However, having said that, it would be nice if we saw more manufacturers offering one-piece bells. So I hope that's kind of a roundabout. That's like the 5-minute answer to a very complicated question. So basically, modern production techniques, speed, efficiency, basically making more money. You can I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, Jake, no one likes smart asses, but I have to add a comment here. When it comes to one-piece versus two-piece bells, there have been built two-piece bells before too.
Yes.
But not of a spun disc, but of a gusset that is inserted.
That's technically, though, those are technically considered one-piece ones, though.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, from the maker standpoint, you would consider that. That's just to fill in the void.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because most of the material, I would still say 75 to 80% of the material is still from one piece. The gusset is just simply to make up for that pipe wedge that's missing.
Yeah, it's like, imagine if you have, there's a bell and then you have like a triangular of metal inserted in the flare part.
Right.
So when you cut out the pattern, the template, you don't need a sheet brass that large.
It's very wasteful too. The problem is if you were to cut out the entire flat sheet of brass for, say, a Kaiser tuba, especially with, say, a 50 centimeter wide bell, you would have such a waste of material that you can't use for say another trumpet bell or something. It's just cut too short. So to get around that, they will then cut a small pipe wedge and put that in there. But
so you can on a non-plated instrument, usually you will see the seam. So when the seam goes round,
like the flare, right?
The flare,
Yeah.
and this is a two-piece bell with the flare spun out of the disc. If the seam goes like splits into two seams at the flare, then it's
it basically looks like someone's cut a pie wedge out of the bell. You'll see it looks like a strange
like a slice of pizza.
Yeah, I think actually every one-piece bell is almost like this. And actually one of the weird ones, the tuba we're talking about today, the BNS, they were very inconsistent with this. You will see one-piece ones that have a seam all the way to the end of the bell and other ones where there is a pie wedge in it. Okay, so moving on. I haven't done this before, but this is something slightly new. We're going to put out a PSA, public service announcement. This goes mostly for trumpet players who play on a Bach, which is probably most of you at some point in your life. Bach valve stems, the aluminum valve stems, please, for the life of me.
For God's sake, Jesus
Once
Christ.
every 6 months, just take your valves out of your horn. You're going to oil them anyway, I hope. Take out the valve stem, unscrew it if you can. If not, go see your instrument maker, have them free them up. Get them out, put a little bit of tiny grease on the threads, and put them back in. Because I saw last week a very nice vintage Bach 37, where the stems, the anodizing on the aluminum stems had failed, and then, of course, moisture comes in contact with the aluminum, resulting in aluminum oxide, which then created an incredible amount of corrosion, which not only locked the stem into the stem tower, the valve tower, required being completely bored out to remove it. The aluminum oxide also managed to find its way onto the surface of the valve and almost destroyed the valve. We were lucky we caught it in time, but if they'd left it for a bit longer, it would have been quite an expensive repair. So that's your PSA. Don't just oil your damn valves, grease your damn valve stems too. And if you have brass valve stems, you can put grease on them too. That's very nice, but that's not the same issue. So if you have an old Martin Committee or an old Con with brass valve stems, you're probably fine. So
yeah, what are you talking about? Anodize? What is anode?
Please feel free, man. Take that one.
Okay, just
balls in your court, bro.
Right, I'm playing the smartass again. So aluminum actually is not the greatest material to use in brass instrument making, but it's so lightweighted and cheap that we feel tempted to do so. But in order to make it work, you have to treat it electrolytically, anodize.
You have to galvanize it, right?
Because the pure aluminum is pretty sensitive to any acids, just a spit, and will start dissolving and creating a lot of problems. It's a little bit the same issue you have with tire valve bodies.
Okay.
So they have this process called anodizing, where they create a very thin coat that protects the aluminum.
Right.
But once that coat gets rubbed off, the bare aluminum tends to corrode pretty fast. If you do some maintenance if you're an instrument maker and do maintenance on aluminum parts, please don't ever put them in the D-scale.
Oh yeah, don't put them in acid. Oh my God,
Never.
please don't.
Just don't.
You're in for a world of hurt there.
Yeah, you're gonna go straight to instrument maker's hell for that.
That, especially if you're working on one of those Con Lindbergh trombones with that valve, that aluminum valve, those things are just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You can't fix that.
So, product of the week. So, oh man, Jake, the other day I was playing trombone and I took a look at our mouthpiece and it looked pretty nasty, greasy. Is there anything I can do about that?
Oh, let me see here. I believe there's a tool that you can buy from your local instrument maker shop.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't that pretty expensive?
I mean, look, brah, you just spent €8 on that bottle of Hetman valve oil.
Yeah.
You just spent $12 on that guard for your hand.
Okay. Yeah.
And
did that.
You just spent, €20 for that tone stabilizing enhancer. And
I thought I was all set up, but something was still missing, right?
Something's missing. Yeah.
So what was it?
So we are offering here in the workshop, in all its glorious 126 millimeters long, a mouthpiece brush with 0.16 millimeter
Wait,
bristles.
stop. Did I get it right? There are brushes just for mouthpieces?
I know, right?
Great. But man, I'm pretty concerned about the well-being of animals, and I mean these hairs from brushes are made like of pork hair.
Oh, wild pig.
Yeah.
No, this has
Or
been made by the hands of the finest Chinese slave labor I
Okay.
think that we know of, and
Mhm.
I believe it's a nylon brush with a metal handle. And
right.
just for hunting season, it's also bright orange. So if you're cleaning your mouthpiece out in the forest in hunting season, you won't get shot either. So you can see this thing from a mile
Oh,
away,
and
which
it even
means you
has
won't.
this little rubber tip, so I don't
Yeah,
scratch the
right. Very nice.
inside of the mouthpiece cup when I clean the mouthpiece. And that's really great, man. And you say all I have is to drop like €1.50 and I'm all set.
That's all it costs, and you will have a clean, happy mouthpiece.
Cool. Just like should I use some soap too or what, or lukewarm water? What do you
Why?
think?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Bit of warm water, soap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to kill all those
yeah.
nasty corona
Yeah, that's right.
viruses.
That's right.
Mm.
So our instrument of the week is a BNS C tuba. It is a model 3097. It's a 4/4 C tuba. For the Yankees listening, that is a PT3C, but this one on the bell.
Wait, why is it called PT?
In the American market, they were imported by a bunch from Americans, and they had their own model numbers, and they called it a PT3. But for Europe or the rest of the world, it
Yeah,
was
well,
a
what
3097.
is it? Is it like a PAL tuba or is it like a
Okay,
power
PT
tuba?
stands for Parentucci. So,
Parentucci.
we'll get back to those guys in a little bit here too. So yeah. So anyway, this is the 4/4 C tuba. It was made. The model was made from, I think, in various forms from the early 80s up until the mid 90s, in which it was replaced by the PT4 and then at some point the PT20, which is the modern version of it. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the history of BNS.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure.
What? B and S?
Yeah, here, take it away, man. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, or should I? Okay, I'll just jump in real quick. Okay, BNS is a brass instrument manufacturer located in the state of Saxon, Germany. It's in a town called Markneukirchen. If you don't know where that is,
Do your research.
yeah, seriously, do your research. This is one of the big, like really big areas.
This is
of
like the
brass instrumentation.
epicenter. This is like the mecca for
Yeah.
brass. Like seriously interested in brass instrument manufacturing, should visit Markneukirchen.
Yes, and most tuba players will definitely at some point will pray in that direction. So at some point, so at least once in your career, you have to try it. Okay, the factory is has quite a long and complicated history, but we're just going to give you the short and dirty here. After the Second World War, in 1948 is the founding of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic of Deutsch, the DDR. And basically what happened was the government then said most of the factories or makers from that time were all going to be brought under one roof, so socialized. In, I don't know how to say, in Klingenthal is the town next to Markneukirchen at that time. There was an old factory called Hess. It was from the 1930s. It was a very big, prominent German factory in the 1930s. The old building where Hess was basically turned into the center point of this conglomerate of instrument makers. So BNS was made up of many different companies that were brought together. Not everyone was forced to join them at that point, but it was quite a few of them. And
in 1953, they incorporated the Deutsche Signalinstrumentenfabrik Max B. Martin.
yeah, and that's where the BNS comes from.
That was based in Markneukirchen. So the name BNS means Blech, Blas und Signalinstrumentenfabrik. So factory for brass and signal instruments.
So you mean signal like police cars, right? Or trains?
Police cars and firefighters.
Yeah, anywhere you need a signal.
Horns, that kind of shit.
Um,
And it was called VEB,
VEB auf Deutsch?
Volkseigener Betrieb. So
The people's.
the people's owned
Yeah.
factory. What is this shit? Why would they do that? Why would they even care about brass instrument manufacturing? Why would the government take it so serious to form a big state-owned factory to mass produce brass instrument?
That is a good point. Actually.
What was their stake in that?
That's a good point.
Any ideas?
Ooh, I mean, maybe I don't know exactly, but I mean,
Dude, they were exporting those horns.
Yeah,
They
of
were
course.
making some good money. They were
Yeah,
paying the
yeah.
workers a few pennies and
Yeah,
selling
yeah.
them for really good money to the West and
Yeah,
even
yeah.
to the States.
And that's gonna is very relevant to the C tuba, as we're going to get to in a second here. But so basically, it was a cash cow for the East German government at that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The name BNS, although starts to appear on the bells of the instruments in 1961, 62. There are maybe one or two earlier ones, but around that point, the factory went on to build probably some of the, all politics aside, they went on to build some of the best brass instruments of the 20th century. I would say probably the late 60s, early 70s was definitely one of the real high points there. The F tubas from that time are even now considered quite legendary. 1989, the wall comes down. You have German Die Wende, so unification, and the factory then is returned to private ownership. That's a whole podcast in itself, how that situation went down. They were under the umbrella of a company called Ja, which I don't know, which is really strange. I don't know what Ja stands for, but I guess it means yes.
Yes.
It's like when you go to a German grocery store, there's a Ja, the really cheap brand, and we always what? Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. And then it became the VMI, the Vogtland Music Instrument Makers Association, I think, or company.
Vogtländische Musikinstrumentenmanufaktur. Whatever.
Genau ist that. Yeah, so is that.
Ah.
And at this point, then in the mid '90s, the old factory, which was in Klingenthal, was then closed, and they started.
Oh wait! It wasn't just like one factory. They had like a lot of
ones, right.
facilities distributed around.
That's
They
true.
were, I don't know, in the high times they had like 1,000 workforce of
It was
like 1,000
It
people
was
in
I thought
total.
around 800, I think, or
Okay.
is it 1,000 or?
I'm not sure, but
We should. This is a question for Mario Vella if he's listening. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
ask you this next time.
well, way bigger. But they had to lay off a lot of people, shut
Yes.
down the old factories. It was all a bit gone out of fashion, and they had seen better times
Yeah,
when the unification came.
yeah. It was a low point for the factory, I think, right before that.
So they set up a nice new factory, gathered all the workers that had remained and the machinery under one roof,
All right.
set up a more effective production line, and that factory is still there in production.
Right.
Well,
And now they're currently owned by the Buffet Group, I believe French owned.
Yeah,
Group.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay. And
yeah. So technically, BNS is not an independent company
yes.
anymore, but it's a brand out of, like, say, a dozen
At
that's
least.
been owned
Yes.
by this. But most people, like, when you are in this town and you say, where do you work? I work for the Signal, or I work for BNS. Everyone will understand
Yeah.
where you're working. But they do a bunch of other brands too. They do the Hoyer horns,
Right.
the Courtois trombones,
Besson instruments, tubas,
Besson
euphoniums.
instruments,
I heard though the Besson one, that's like one of the worst jobs. I hate working on those. Maybe it's the piston valve thing for the Germans. I don't know, but that's like apparently putting a E flat tubas together is like makes Germans very grumpy. So yeah.
They have the Scherzer piccolos and
That's right. Yeah.
Raries, and what else?
Clarinets, right? Or is that a different?
Not in that
woodwinds?
same factory.
It's
They
down
have
the
like
street,
a
that's right.
woodwind facility a few meters away in the same industrial area. But yeah,
So anyway, so that's a very short, in a nutshell, history of BNS. As you can tell, it's really complicated. We need more time, and we should
I
dedicate
really
all
hope
of
that
this.
at a certain point we get some of the former workers or even the actual workers
Yeah.
into this podcast so they can relate. Oh my god. 2016, I spent like 5 months there
Yeah.
on the trombone assembly line.
Okay.
It was quite an interesting, as I told you, every seriously interested person in brass instrument maker should at least once in a lifetime go to Markneukirchen
Agreed.
or even work there if you can make it.
If you can swing it.
Man, it's a trip. It's a trip. It's really worth the experience. It's a very special place.
Yeah. But it does have some, I will say this, it does have some of the most skilled labor, especially for old school stuff. Wow.
Yeah.
Some of those
Man,
guys, wow.
People
like,
there
amazing
are
what they can
making
do.
brass instruments for generations.
Yeah, it's just like stuff that for us was just wow. Even for us, it's like mind blowing what they can do sometimes. You know?
Yeah.
So, anyways, getting back on topic here, our feature instrument is this BNSC tuba. How to say this tuba is among the other projects I've been working on this week. I had a little bit of time. This instrument actually belongs to me personally, and I thought the story of the instrument was interesting enough that it would, as dear listeners, you might find this also interesting. When I first moved to Berlin, I didn't have a C tuba. I just played F and B flat. I played C tuba previously back in the States, but I didn't have a C tuba anymore. I went to go sub in the Berlin, the Rundfunk here, the Berlin radio, and the colleague was like nice enough. He's like, "Oh, we're damn lazy. Don't bring your horn. I'll just leave my horns on stage for you. You can just use them." Oh, great. Okay. So one of his tubas he left on stage was one of these PT3s, or this 3097, whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't care. And it was great. It was fantastic tuba. Wow, I loved it. You know, it's like a small F tuba, like a big F tuba.
You mean it was like laugh on the first side?
Not bad, not bad. You know, got some little intonation things here and there, but the thing put out.
The chemistry was right.
It has some. It could put out a pretty good noise. So I thought, hey, let me look for one of these things. And then, oddly enough, 2 weeks later, a colleague here in Berlin was like, "Hey, I'm selling mine." I'm like, "Oh, cool, sweet." So whenever I go see the instrument. It's the original owner, and I tried it, and it sucked balls. It was terrible. I mean, compared to the one in the Rundfunk, it just sucked. It was crap. Really hard to play, like very stuffy, out of tune, everything. I'm like, but.
I wonder why he was selling it.
Yeah, so he was basically sick of it too. He admitted to me, yeah, it's not a good horn. I can't make heads or tails of it. I play F2 90% of the time anyway, and I'm buying a new one, and I'm sick of this thing. Just make me an offer and take it off my hands. Like, all right, I'm pretty confident in my ability as a brass instrument maker that I can probably figure out what's wrong here. So fine, so I bought it, and I brought it into the shop, and I started peeking through it. And what I found was really bizarre. On the fifth valve, on rotary valves, if you take off the back cap of the fifth valve, which is the very
like
top
the screw
yeah,
cap
you unscrew the decal off the back.
of the rotor itself.
Rotor. The corks or the rubber, whatever you want to call it, the Anschlaggummis, the rubber on the back of the valves were aligned correctly. The lines were right. However, when you shined a light down into the casing and looked, the valve was completely misaligned. It was actually leaking. The valve was basically in the wrong position. Like that is really strange.
Way.
There are occasionally QC issues, but that was really.
Was the valve maker drunk or?
Well, that was the.
Did they leave the apprentice? Hey, come on here. Yeah, like 200 tuba rotors. Just file in the.
Keep filing that
marking.
notch, right? So
They
anyway.
should do that. Yeah, just keep going. Okay.
Yeah. So this one was completely wrong. The notches were filed wrong on one side, which resulted.
Possible.
Yeah, which resulted in a really shitty tuba. So okay, fine. Refiled the pin, the marks on it, cut them off, put it back together. Played great, fantastic, and it's.
That was all.
That's all I had to do, and the horn played great.
Oh man.
Yeah, but why was it like that? So that was for me a huge question, right? So
You have a theory on that?
Yeah, no, it's more than a theory. I actually know. So I actually, by chance, I actually met one of the gentlemen who used to work there back in the 80s. This one was made in the mid to late 80s, I believe. Okay. So here's the story. In Berlin, from the 1960s up until 2000s, there was a very famous tuba player in Berlin. He played in the Komische Opera. He was also professor at the Hans Eisler Music Hochschule and also UDK. Those are the two big music schools here in Berlin. His name was Dietrich Unkrot. And he had a young student in the mid 80s who needed an F tuba and a C tuba. And okay, so the way it would work is.
Remember, mid 80s, that was still East Germany.
Yeah, this is still separate countries. So this is East Berlin. This is under the communist government.
And Hans Eisler is the East Berlin music school.
So after the unification, he also taught it at the West German one. But before, he only taught at Hans Eisler, and he played in the Komische Opera, which was the East German, one of the East German operas.
Yeah.
Okay. Long story short. So, this tuba player in the orchestra wants to get a tuba for his student. What's he do? He calls up the factory. He says, "Guys, I need a tuba for my student. I actually need a couple horns, right?" However, as my colleague previously mentioned, most of the instruments, especially the good ones, they went for export. The way it would work was the factory, not always, but for the most part, the factory would build let's just say, just talking about the C tuba, they built, 8 to 12 of them. So they did one short production run. And then a certain American from Munich, if he's listening, he knows who he is, would then go over and he would have first dibs on these horns. He would pick out the best ones, which he would then bring with him back to Europe and then export to the States or sell in Europe. and he had an exclusive dealership with his colleague for doing this. And from the East German perspective, that's fucking bullshit. I mean, you think about it, you're one of the best players in the country. You can't even get the best stuff for your students. You might get pretty hacked off. So he found a workaround. So rather than getting sloppy seconds, what he did was he managed to get a hold of one or two of the guys in the tuba department. I'm not quite sure how exactly, but they found each other. A little bit of bribery went on here. Something slipped under the table, and he got first dibs. So he managed to pick out 3 of these tubas that he quite liked. So what they did was they then took the instruments out and they sabotaged them. Very slightly. They would just change very small things that you couldn't pick up very quickly.
Wow.
And
man, this is some serious shit you're talking about.
No, serious.
Are you really sure this?
Yeah.
You're not making any false accusations here?
I'm not naming no names. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't say no names. I tell no lies. So they would just very slightly sabotage some of the instruments. It's not something that happened very often. This was probably like maybe 2 or 3 times they did this. But the American who would test the instruments, he wrote off this particular instrument as quite a poor playing example, as he should have. And then what should have happened is after they were rejected, they should have gone back and then fixed the issue. However, on this tuba, they forgot. And the tuba went to its new owner with its misaligned valve. And this poor bastard had to suffer with this thing for 20-something years.
I was playing this.
He hated it
for 20 years.
Fucking hated it.
Oh,
and
man.
Yeah, he got stuck with a shitty horn for all these years.
And blaming himself for not being able to play it properly or what?
Thought he had a bad one. Like told the teacher this tuba's crap. I'm just gonna put it in the corner. He plays, and he plays mostly F tuba anyway, so it wasn't.
That's so sad.
Wasn't the end of the world, but was pretty angry about it. But
okay.
But that's the story of the tuba though, and that's how it came into my possession. And by chance, I actually met the person who sabotaged it. So years later, so I was actually meeting with him about something else, and as all things happen in Markneukirchen, there was a lot of alcohol involved, and both of us were absolutely hammered, and we're talking about tubas we were working on. I was saying we're talking about QC issues, like basically things that fail quality control. And I saw this like 80s like C tuba, and he's like, oh shit, really? It's like, fuck, I might have done that. What do you mean you did that? Like, yeah, this is the story, and so on. And so, okay. And I talked to some of the other students of the teacher, and they also told me a similar story about this too. So this was the other way to get a tuba in those days was just to pay one of the makers then to steal parts from the factory and make you a tuba on the side. That was the other way to do it. But
that's
basically,
how you end up with these unmarked.
Yeah, that happens.
Without any serial numbers.
Yeah. Hey man, it's the communist times. You gotta do what you gotta do.
Tough times, man.
Tough times.
Find your way to.
Yeah. So that's the history of that. So anyway, the tuba's had all its issues sorted out. It plays awesome. It's wonderful. It's just, I've been thinking, for the last 20 years, it has the 5th valve in the left hand, and it's driving me crazy. And I just okay, convert the linkage, do some updating on the valves and some stuff like that. And it's a nice tuba. So if you ever happen to see an 80s vintage 3097, give it a try.
Oh man, I'm so glad now we're having freedom and capitalism and everything is fine and we are all happy.
I know, right?
Hooray!
Yay! Thanks, guys. And I believe that is the podcast for today. If you have any questions, any burning desires, do you need deeper knowledge of brass instrument making, write us, contact us. Remember, subscribe to this podcast because we are the best ever brass makers podcast. We will do our best to get back to you, answer your questions, and I believe that's it.
Yeah, and don't forget to visit Markneukirchen on the beautiful Falkland.
And be careful today because it is Friday the 13th.
Have a good weekend.
Take
everybody.
care, everybody. Bye-bye.